Marcus Chen had been a prisoner aboard the Zephyrian battlecruiser for 3 standard galactic months. The alien captors found humans to be an amusing curiosity, nothing more than a primitive species that had barely crawled out of their home system before being captured during a routine patrol sweep near the Outer Rim territories. The Zephyrians were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 8 feet tall with crystalline skin that shifted colors based on their emotional states. Their society revolved around displays of strength and dominance, and they had conquered dozens of worlds across the galaxy. To them, humans were soft, weak creatures that posed no threat to anyone. Marcus had been the chief engineer aboard the human exploration vessel Odyssey when the Zephyrians ambushed them near a nebula cluster. His crewmates had been sold to various alien slave markets, but Marcus had been kept as a personal entertainment for Captain Thexvor, the commanding officer of the battlecruiser. The alien took perverse pleasure in watching the human struggle, with basic tasks that any Zephyrian child could accomplish. The ship's corridors were filled with the sounds of alien crew members going about their duties. Marcus had learned enough of their language to understand basic commands and conversations. He knew they viewed him as nothing more than a pet, something to be poked and prodded for their amusement. On this particular day, Captain Thexvor was hosting a gathering of high-ranking officers from the Zephyrian fleet. The battlecruiser had docked at Station Morthak, a massive military outpost that served as a hub for the Empire's expansion efforts. The station was known throughout the galaxy for its gladiatorial arenas and exotic creature exhibitions. Marcus was dragged from his cramped holding cell by 2 guards who towered over him. Their crystalline skin glowed a dull orange, indicating their boredom with the mundane task. They hauled him through the ship's corridors toward the docking bay, where a transport shuttle waited to take them to the station. The shuttle ride was brief, but uncomfortable. Marcus was crammed between the 2 guards while Captain Thexvor and his guests discussed their plans for the evening's entertainment. From what Marcus could understand, they were planning to visit the station's famous creature pits, where dangerous beasts from across the galaxy were kept for various purposes. Station Morthak was a sight to behold. The massive structure stretched for kilometers in all directions, with docking bays that could accommodate ships of enormous size. The interior was a maze of corridors, chambers, and arenas designed to showcase the Zephyrian Empire's military might and cultural dominance. The group made their way through the station's main thoroughfares, passing vendors selling exotic weapons and alien delicacies. Marcus noticed how other species on the station kept their distance from the Zephyrians, clearly recognizing their position in the galactic hierarchy. Humans were so rare in this part of the galaxy that most aliens had never seen one before, and Marcus drew curious stares from the diverse crowd. They eventually arrived at the creature exhibition levels, where the station's most dangerous inhabitants were housed. The facility was designed like an ancient coliseum, with viewing platforms surrounding massive pits where various alien beasts were kept. Each pit contained creatures from different worlds, ranging from the ice-dwelling froststalkers of Kepler Prime to the fire-breathing sandworms of the desert planet Xerian Captain. Thexvor led his guests to a private viewing area, overlooking what the facility staff called the Dragon Pit. The name was somewhat misleading, as the creatures housed within were not true dragons in the mythological sense, but rather something far more ancient and mysterious. The pit contained 3 massive reptilian beings, each standing nearly 20 feet tall with scales that seemed to absorb light itself. These creatures were called Vorthak in the ancient Zephyrian language, which roughly translated to shadow bringers. They had been discovered on a dead world at the edge of known space, apparently the last survivors of a civilization that had died out millions of years ago. The creatures possessed an intelligence that bordered on sentience, but they had never shown any signs of communication or cooperation with other species. The Vorthak had proven impossible to tame or train. They attacked anything that entered their domain with savage ferocity, using not only their massive size and razor-sharp claws, but also a form of energy projection that could reduce most materials to ash. Many had tried to study them or use them as weapons, but the creatures remained utterly hostile to all forms of life. Captain Thexvor gestured toward the pit with obvious pride. He began explaining to his guests how the station had acquired these particular specimens during a military expedition to the outer territories. The creatures had been dormant when discovered, apparently in some form of hibernation, but had awakened during transport and killed dozens of soldiers before being contained. The conversation turned to the evening's planned entertainment. One of the guests, a particularly cruel officer named Commander Veltar, suggested they find something amusing to throw into the pit. The group laughed at the suggestion, their crystalline skin shifting to various shades of yellow and green, indicating their excitement and anticipation. Captain Thexvor's gaze fell upon Marcus, and a wicked smile crossed his features. The alien's skin began to glow with a bright red hue, signaling his malicious intent. He pointed at the human and spoke to his companions in their native tongue, explaining how entertaining it would be to watch the primitive creature face the ancient beasts. The other officers responded with enthusiasm, their own skin colors shifting to match their captain's excitement. They began making bets on how long the human would survive in the pit, with most estimating mere seconds before the Vorthak tore him apart. Marcus understood enough of their conversation to realize what they were planning. His heart began to race as the implications became clear. These aliens intended to throw him into the pit with those massive creatures as nothing more than a cruel joke. He tried to back away, but the guards immediately seized his arms and began dragging him toward the pit's edge. The facility staff initially protested, explaining that the pit was off-limits to unauthorized personnel. But Captain Thexvor's rank and influence quickly silenced their objections. The station's management was not about to anger a high-ranking Zephyrian officer over the fate of a single human slave. A mechanical platform extended over the pit, designed to lower maintenance equipment and food into the creature's domain. The guards forced Marcus onto the platform while the Zephyrian officers gathered around the viewing area, their excitement growing with each passing moment. The Vorthak below seemed to sense the approaching presence, their massive forms stirring in the shadows of their artificial cavern. The platform descended slowly into the pit, giving Marcus precious moments to assess his situation. The walls of the enclosure were smooth metal, polished to prevent any creature from climbing out. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across the artificial cavern, creating a maze of light and darkness that would have been disorienting under normal circumstances. As the platform reached the bottom, Marcus could see the three Vorthak more clearly. They were even more imposing up close, their scales seeming to shift and flow like liquid shadow. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of ancient intelligence and barely contained rage. Each creature possessed 4 powerful limbs ending in claws that could easily tear through reinforced steel, and their heads were crowned with horn-like protrusions that crackled with energy. The platform retracted with a mechanical whir, leaving Marcus alone on the pit floor. Above, he could hear the excited chatter of the Zephyrian officers as they placed their final bets and prepared to watch the spectacle. The facility's staff had activated recording devices to capture the event. Likely for later distribution as entertainment footage, Marcus stood perfectly still, trying not to provoke the creatures while his mind raced through possible survival strategies. His military training had included basic xenobiology studies, but nothing had prepared him for creatures like these. The Vorthak seemed to be evaluating him, their glowing eyes tracking his every movement with unsettling intelligence. The largest of the 3 creatures took a step forward, its massive foot creating a small tremor in the pit floor. Marcus could feel the raw power emanating from the beast, a presence that seemed to press against his consciousness like a physical weight. The creature's head tilted slightly as if it were trying to understand what it was seeing. What happened next defied all expectations. Instead of attacking, the massive Vorthak lowered its head in what could only be described as a bow. The gesture was deliberate and unmistakable, and the other 2 creatures immediately followed suit, lowering their own heads in apparent reverence. The silence from the viewing area above was deafening. Marcus could practically feel the shock radiating from the Zephyrian officers as they witnessed something that contradicted everything they knew about these creatures. The Vorthak had never shown anything but hostility toward other life forms, yet here they were bowing to a human. Marcus himself was stunned by the development. He had expected to die within moments of entering the pit, yet instead found himself facing 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous creatures in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. The largest Vorthak raised its head slightly and made a sound that was part growl, part harmony, as if it were trying to communicate. The creature's eyes seemed to bore into Marcus's soul, and for a moment he felt a strange sensation, as if something were probing the edges of his consciousness. The feeling was not unpleasant, more like a gentle investigation than an invasion. Images began to flash through his mind, visions of ancient worlds and forgotten civilizations. He saw vast cities built by beings that looked remarkably similar to humans, though taller and more elegant in their proportions. These beings lived in harmony with creatures like the Vorthak, working together to build a civilization that spanned multiple star systems. The images showed advanced technology that seemed to blend science with something that could only be described as magic. The visions continued, showing the gradual decline of this ancient civilization. A great catastrophe had befallen them, something from beyond the known galaxy that consumed worlds and left nothing but death in its wake. The survivors had fought desperately against this cosmic horror, but in the end, they had been forced to take desperate measures to preserve something of their legacy. Marcus saw the final moments of this ancient race, as they used their most powerful technologies to scatter seeds of their civilization across the galaxy. They encoded their knowledge and memories into the very fabric of reality itself, hoping that someday their inheritors would arise to continue their work. The visions faded, leaving Marcus with a profound understanding that somehow, impossibly, humanity was connected to this lost civilization. The genetic markers that made humans unique among galactic species were not random mutations but rather carefully preserved elements of this ancient heritage. The largest Vorthak stepped closer, its massive form moving with surprising grace. It lowered its head until it was level with Marcus, and he found himself staring into eyes that held the wisdom of eons. The creature made another sound, this one clearly meant as a greeting or acknowledgement. Above, Captain Thexivor was shouting orders at the facility staff, demanding explanations for the creature's behavior. The other Zephyrian officers were backing away from the pit edge, their skin colors shifting rapidly between confusion, fear, and anger. They had expected to witness a brutal execution, not whatever this was. The facility's chief researcher, a nervous-looking alien called Dr. Morketh, was frantically checking his instruments and databases. He had studied the Vorthak for years without ever seeing them display anything but aggression toward other species. The current situation was unprecedented and terrifying in its implications. Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him as he realized that he was in no immediate danger. The Vorthak were not just refraining from attacking him, they were actually protecting him. When one of the facility guards attempted to lower a capture net into the pit, the creatures moved to intercept it, their energy projection abilities reducing the device to molten slag before it could reach Marcus. The second Vorthak approached from the left, moving with the same respectful posture as its companion. This one was slightly smaller but no less imposing, with scales that seemed to shimmer with inner light. It made a series of complex sounds that Marcus somehow understood were meant as questions about his origins and purpose. Marcus attempted to communicate back, using simple gestures and spoken words. To his amazement, the creatures seemed to understand his meaning, if not his actual words. They began to respond with their own gestures, creating a primitive but effective form of communication. The third Vorthak, which had been hanging back near the far wall of the pit, finally approached the group. This one was different from the others, its scales bearing intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change like living tattoos. When it looked at Marcus, he felt another mental touch, but this one was different from the first. Instead of showing him visions of the past, it seemed to be evaluating his potential future. Images flashed through his mind of himself standing alongside these creatures, leading them into battle against an unnamed enemy. He saw human fleets working in coordination with Vorthak forces, their combined strength capable of challenging even the mighty Zephyrian Empire. The visions were fragmented and unclear, but the message was unmistakable. This meeting was not an accident, but rather the beginning of something far greater. The facility's alarms began to sound as the situation spiraled beyond anyone's control. The Vorthak were becoming increasingly agitated by the presence of the Zephyrian officers above, their energy discharges growing stronger and more frequent. The very air in the pit began to crackle with power as the ancient creatures prepared for what might come next. The station's emergency protocols activated as energy readings from the dragon pit spiked beyond safe parameters. Automated systems began evacuating nearby sections, while containment barriers deployed around the viewing area. The Vorthak had never exhibited such intense energy output before, and the facility's staff scrambled to understand what was happening. Captain Thexvor refused to retreat, despite the obvious danger. His pride would not allow him to flee from what he still considered to be simple beasts, regardless of their strange behavior toward the human. He ordered the facility guards to increase security around the pit and demanded that Dr. Morketh find a way to extract Marcus immediately. Down in the pit, Marcus found himself at the center of an increasingly complex situation. The three Vorthak had arranged themselves in a protective triangle around him, their massive forms creating an impenetrable barrier between him and any potential threats from above. Their energy fields were interacting in ways that created a shimmering dome of power over their small group. The largest creature, which Marcus had begun thinking of as the leader, suddenly raised its head and released a sound unlike anything it had made before. The call was deep and resonant, seeming to come from the very core of its being. The sound waves traveled through the station's structure, carrying far beyond the confines of the pit. Dr. Morketh's instruments detected the call propagating through subspace frequencies that shouldn't have been possible for biological organisms to access. The Vorthak was broadcasting on channels typically reserved for the most advanced communication systems, and the signal was powerful enough to reach across multiple star systems. The response came within minutes. Similar calls echoed back through the void, distant but unmistakably from more Vorthak. Dr. Morketh's face went pale as he realized the implications. If there were more of these creatures out there, and they were capable of coordinating their actions across vast distances, then everything the scientific community believed about them was wrong. Marcus felt the vibrations of the call through his bones, and somehow understood its meaning. The leader was announcing his presence to others of its kind, informing them that the time of waiting was over. The genetic inheritors of the ancient civilization had finally revealed themselves, and the next phase of some vast plan could begin. The second Vorthak began to glow more brightly, its scales shifting through a spectrum of colors that Marcus had never seen before. Energy coursed along its body in intricate patterns that resembled the circuit designs from advanced human technology, but far more complex and elegant. The creature was channeling power from sources that defied conventional understanding of physics. Above, the Zephyrian officers were becoming increasingly agitated. Their skin colors shifted rapidly between anger and fear as they watched their carefully controlled situation slip away from them. Captain Thexvor was shouting orders at anyone within range, demanding that the facility use whatever means necessary to regain control of the situation. The facility's security chief, a veteran soldier named Commander Zexkol, advised immediate evacuation of the entire level. The energy readings were approaching critical levels, and there was no telling what the Vorthak might be capable of if they continued to escalate their output. The containment systems had been designed to hold the creatures when they were dormant or minimally active, not when they were operating at full power. Dr. Morketh received an urgent communication from his research team in the facility's main laboratory. They had been monitoring subspace traffic and detected multiple signals converging on their location. Whatever the Vorthak in the pit had called, it was bringing others toward Station Morthak at incredible speed. The third Vorthak suddenly moved, approaching one of the pit walls with purpose. It placed its massive claws against the metal surface and began to channel energy directly into the station's structure. The wall began to glow and pulse with the same rhythmic pattern as the creature's scales, as if the metal itself was being transformed into some kind of conductor. Marcus watched in fascination as the creature worked. He could sense that it was not trying to escape but rather preparing for something much more significant. The energy being channeled into the station's structure was creating a network of some kind, connecting the pit to other systems throughout the facility. The station's main computer systems began to register anomalies as unknown energy patterns infiltrated their networks. Security protocols that had been in place for decades suddenly found themselves dealing with intrusion attempts that operated on principles their creators had never imagined. The Vorthak was not just accessing the computer systems. It was teaching them new ways to function. Captain Thexvor finally lost his patience with the situation. He drew his personal weapon, a sophisticated energy rifle capable of punching through heavy armor, and aimed it down into the pit. His intention was clear. If he could not control the situation, he would end it by eliminating the human who seemed to be at the center of everything. The moment his finger touched the trigger, all three Vorthak reacted simultaneously. Their combined energy fields created a barrier that absorbed his weapon's discharge completely, the deadly energy simply vanishing into their protective dome. The largest creature turned its glowing eyes toward the captain and released a sound that was unmistakably a warning. The temperature in the viewing area began to rise as the Vorthak's energy output increased in response to the threat. Several of the Zephyrian officers' weapons began to malfunction as the electromagnetic fields in the area grew stronger. The facility's emergency cooling systems activated automatically. Struggling to compensate for the sudden heat buildup, Marcus felt a new sensation, as if the creatures were trying to communicate something urgent to him. Images flashed through his mind again, but these were different from the historical visions he had experienced earlier. These showed immediate possibilities, potential futures that branched out from this moment in time. He saw himself standing on the bridge of a human starship, but not any design he recognized. The vessel was larger and more advanced than anything humanity had yet built, incorporating technology that seemed to blend human engineering with Vorthak energy manipulation. Around him stood crew members from multiple species, working together under human leadership. Another vision showed fleets of these hybrid vessels engaging Zephyrian forces in massive space battles. The combined human-Vorthak technology proved superior to anything the Empire could field, turning the tide of conflicts that had raged for centuries. The oppressed species of the galaxy rallied behind this new alliance, finally seeing hope for freedom from Zephyrian domination. The visions continued, showing the establishment of new colonies on worlds that had been considered uninhabitable. The Vorthak's energy manipulation abilities allowed for the transformation of entire planets, creating environments suitable for life where none had existed before. Humanity's gift for adaptation and innovation combined with Vorthak power to create possibilities that neither species could have achieved alone. Dr. Morketh's urgent voice cut through the chaos in the viewing area. His instruments were detecting multiple large objects approaching the station at impossible speeds. Whatever was coming, they would arrive within the hour, and their energy signatures matched those of the Vorthak in the pit. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. The call from the pit had not just been a communication, it had been a summons. More Vorthak were coming to Station Morthak, and based on their approach vectors and speeds, they were not traveling in containment vessels. They were coming under their own power, free and unrestrained, ready to reclaim one of their own and the human who had somehow awakened their ancient purpose. Station Commander Vexmore received the emergency reports with growing alarm. The approaching entities were not showing up on conventional sensors, but their gravitational effects were creating distortions in local spacetime that couldn't be ignored. Whatever was coming toward Station Morthak possessed mass and energy capabilities that dwarfed anything in the Zephyrian fleet. The commander immediately contacted the nearest battle group, requesting immediate reinforcement. However, the responding admiral was skeptical of reports about creatures that could travel through space unprotected and move at speeds that violated known laws of physics. The delay in military response would prove costly for the Zephyrian Empire. In the Dragon Pit, Marcus found himself experiencing another wave of mental communication from the Vorthak. This time the images were clearer and more detailed, showing him the true scope of what was approaching. The creatures coming to the station were not just individual beings, but rather components of something much larger and more organized. The visions revealed ancient Vorthak installations hidden throughout the galaxy, concealed on dead worlds and in the depths of space. These installations had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the signal that would activate them. The call from the pit had been that signal, and now these sleeping giants were awakening across the galaxy. Marcus saw massive structures emerging from planetary surfaces, their crystalline forms stretching kilometers into the sky. Energy cascaded between these installations, creating a network that spanned entire star systems. The Vorthak were not just individual creatures, but rather living components of a galactic intelligence that had been patiently waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The leader of the three creatures in the pit approached Marcus directly, lowering its great head until they were at eye level. The mental connection between them strengthened, and Marcus found himself able to understand concepts that had no equivalent in human language. The Vorthak was not just showing him visions, it was downloading information directly into his consciousness. He learned that the ancient civilization he had seen in earlier visions had not truly died out. Instead, they had transcended physical existence, encoding their consciousness into the energy patterns that the Vorthak could manipulate. The creatures served as both guardians and vessels for this preserved intelligence, waiting for the day when suitable inheritors would arise. Humanity's rapid technological development and innate adaptability had marked them as the chosen successors to this ancient legacy. The genetic modifications that made humans unique among galactic species were not random evolution, but rather careful preparation by the transcended ancients. Every human carried within their DNA the potential to interface with Vorthak technology and energy manipulation abilities. The second Vorthak had completed its work on the pit wall, creating a network of energy conduits that now extended throughout the station's structure. The facility's computer systems were being systematically integrated into a larger intelligence, one that operated on principles far beyond current understanding. Security cameras throughout the station began to coordinate their movements, tracking the approach of the incoming entities with impossible precision. Dr. Morketh watched in fascination and terror as his life's work was transformed before his eyes. Decades of research into Vorthak behavior and capabilities were rendered obsolete in a matter of minutes. The creatures he had thought were simple, if powerful beasts were revealing themselves to be components of a technology so advanced that it appeared to be indistinguishable from magic. Captain Thexvor's communication device crackled with urgent reports from across the station. Power fluctuations were occurring throughout the facility as the Vorthak's energy network integrated with existing systems. Life support remained stable, but weapon systems and security protocols were being systematically disabled or repurposed for unknown functions. The third Vorthak began to emit a harmonic frequency that resonated through the station's hull. The sound was barely audible to organic hearing, but it created vibrations that traveled through the structure's metal framework. Station personnel reported feeling an odd tingling sensation, as if the very air around them was becoming charged with potential energy. Marcus realized that the creatures were preparing the station for the arrival of their kin. The energy network being created would serve as both a landing platform and a communication hub for whatever was coming. The Vorthak were not planning to escape. They were turning Station Morthak into a base of operations for something much larger. The first of the approaching entities appeared on long-range sensors as a massive energy signature moving at impossible speeds. The object was easily the size of a battlecruiser, but it showed none of the characteristics of conventional spacecraft. There were no engine emissions, no hull structures, and no recognizable technology signatures. It was simply a concentrated mass of energy moving through space with obvious intelligence and purpose. Commander Vexmore ordered the station's defensive systems to power up, but the weapons arrays failed to respond. The Vorthak's integration with the facility's systems had given them control over all military functions. The station's massive plasma cannons and missile batteries remained silent and motionless, leaving the facility defenseless against whatever was approaching. The second approaching entity appeared shortly after the first, followed by a third and fourth. Each one was unique in its energy signature, but all shared the same impossible characteristics of the first. They were moving in a coordinated formation, clearly working together toward a common goal. In the pit, Marcus felt the excitement building among the three Vorthak as their kin approached. The mental connection between him and the creatures was growing stronger, allowing him to sense their emotions and intentions with increasing clarity. They were not just happy about the reunion. They were eager to begin the next phase of their long-dormant plan. The leader communicated to Marcus that he would need to make a choice. The approaching Vorthak would offer humanity a partnership that could reshape the galaxy, but it would require abandoning the safety of ignorance for the responsibilities of true power. The decision would affect not just Marcus himself, but the entire future of his species. Images flashed through his mind showing the alternatives. If humanity rejected the partnership, they would be left to face the coming galactic changes alone. The Zephyrian Empire was not the only threat in the galaxy, and there were forces moving in the darkness that would soon make themselves known. Without the protection and technology of the Vorthak Alliance, humanity would likely be consumed by these greater threats. However, if humanity accepted the partnership, they would become the leaders of a new galactic order. The ancient knowledge preserved by the Vorthak would allow human civilization to advance by millennia in a matter of years. The responsibility would be enormous, but so would the potential for positive change throughout the galaxy. The largest approaching entity was now close enough for the station's sensors to detect its structure. What they revealed defied all understanding of physics and biology. The entity appeared to be a living creature of impossible size, its body composed of crystalline formations that pulsed with internal energy. It was not a ship-carrying Vorthak. It was a Vorthak itself, grown to dimensions that dwarfed any known life form. The creature's approach created gravitational distortions that affected the station's orbit around the nearby planet. Emergency thrusters fired automatically to compensate, but the effects were minimal compared to the massive forces being generated by the approaching being. Station Morthak was being drawn inexorably toward a meeting that would change the course of galactic history. The massive Vorthak entity's arrival at Station Morthak created a spectacle that would be remembered throughout galactic history. The creature's crystalline body stretched for kilometers, dwarfing the military installation as it positioned itself alongside the station's main docking arrays. Energy cascaded along its surface in patterns that seemed to follow mathematical principles beyond current understanding. Inside the Dragon Pit, the three original Vorthak began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that matched those emanating from their enormous kin. The energy dome surrounding Marcus intensified, creating a protective barrier that shimmered with rainbow colors. He could feel the power building around him, but instead of being threatening, it felt welcoming and familiar. Captain Thexvor and his officers found themselves trapped in the viewing area as the facility's security systems locked down under Vorthak control. The blast doors had sealed automatically, and their weapons were completely useless against the energy fields that now permeated the station. They could only watch helplessly as their carefully ordered universe began to unravel. The massive entity outside began to interface directly with Station Morthak's structure. Tendrils of crystalline material extended from its body, merging seamlessly with the station's hull plating. The metal began to transform, taking on the same shimmering properties as Vorthak scales. The station itself was being converted into something new, a hybrid of Zephyrian engineering and ancient Vorthak biotechnology. Dr. Morketh's research equipment detected energy patterns that his instruments couldn't properly analyze. The reading suggested that the Vorthak were manipulating fundamental forces that science had only theoretical knowledge of. Matter was being transformed at the molecular level, creating materials that shouldn't have been possible under normal physical laws. Marcus felt another surge of mental communication from the Vorthak leader. This time, the information transfer was more intense and comprehensive than before. He found himself learning about the true nature of the galaxy and humanity's place within it. The knowledge was overwhelming, but somehow his mind was able to process and retain information that would have taken years of study to acquire through conventional means. The ancient civilization that had preceded current galactic society had faced a threat from beyond known space. Entities from a parallel dimension had begun infiltrating reality, consuming entire star systems and converting them into bridgeheads for further invasion. The war against these interdimensional parasites had lasted for millennia and had ultimately required the sacrifice of the ancient civilization's physical existence. Before transcending, the ancients had created the Vorthak as both guardians and as vessels for their preserved consciousness. The creatures had been designed to wait for the emergence of a species capable of inheriting the ancients' legacy and continuing their work. Humanity's unique genetic markers and rapid technological advancement had identified them as the chosen inheritors. The threat from the parallel dimension had not been eliminated, merely delayed. The interdimensional entities were still probing the barriers between realities, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. Recent disturbances in subspace had indicated that they were preparing for another major incursion, one that would be far more devastating than their previous attempts. The second massive Vorthak entity arrived during Marcus's information download, followed quickly by the third and fourth. Each one was unique in design and capabilities, representing different aspects of the ancient civilization's knowledge and power. Together they began to create a formation around Station Morthak that generated energy fields of incredible complexity. The station's personnel could only watch in awe and terror as their facility was transformed around them. Corridors that had been utilitarian metal passages now gleamed with organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with inner light. Computer terminals evolved into crystalline interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch. The very air seemed to become more alive, charged with possibilities that hadn't existed before. Commander Vexmore attempted to contact the Zephyrian fleet, but his communication systems were no longer under his control. The Vorthak had integrated with every aspect of the station's technology, creating a hybrid intelligence that operated according to principles he couldn't understand. His requests for military assistance went unanswered because they were never transmitted. In the transformed dragon pit, Marcus found himself surrounded by an environment that was becoming increasingly alien, yet somehow familiar. The walls had taken on the appearance of living crystal, and the floor beneath his feet felt warm and responsive to his presence. The three original Vorthak had arranged themselves in positions that created a complex geometric pattern, their energy fields interacting to generate phenomena that defied classification. The leader approached Marcus once more, but this time its massive head came to rest gently on the ground before him. The gesture was clearly an invitation, and Marcus understood intuitively what was being offered. He could join with the Vorthak consciousness directly, becoming a bridge between human potential and ancient knowledge. The mental connection deepened as Marcus accepted the invitation. His consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his individual mind, touching the vast network of intelligence that connected all Vorthak across the galaxy. He could sense awakening installations on dozens of worlds, feel the stirring of creatures that had slumbered for millions of years, and perceive the intricate patterns of energy that bound the galaxy together. Through this expanded awareness, Marcus also sensed the approaching threat from beyond. The interdimensional entities were massing in the spaces between realities, preparing for an invasion that would consume entire galactic clusters. Their previous incursions had been limited probes compared to what they were now planning. The barrier between dimensions was weakening, and they would soon have the opportunity to unleash their full might against reality itself. The Vorthak showed Marcus humanity's potential role in the coming conflict. Human adaptability and innovation, combined with Vorthak energy manipulation and ancient knowledge, could create technologies capable of not just defending against the interdimensional threat, but potentially driving them back permanently. However, this would require a fundamental transformation of human civilization and their relationship with the rest of the galaxy. The massive entities surrounding the station began to generate a coordinated energy field that extended far beyond Station Morthak itself. The field was creating a subspace communication network that could reach every inhabited system in the galaxy simultaneously. When activated, it would broadcast a message that would change everything for every species in known space. Captain Thexvor and his officers watched helplessly as their view of the galaxy was fundamentally altered. The creatures they had dismissed as primitive beasts were revealing themselves to be components of a civilization that made the Zephyrian Empire look like children playing with toys. Their assumptions about galactic hierarchy and the natural order of species dominance were crumbling. With each passing moment, Dr. Morketh realized that his research had barely scratched the surface of what the Vorthak truly represented. Every paper he had written, every theory he had developed, was now obsolete in the face of the reality unfolding before him. The creatures were not specimens to be studied, but rather teachers waiting for students advanced enough to understand their lessons. The energy field surrounding Station Morthak reached critical resonance, and Marcus felt the moment approaching when the galaxy would learn the truth about its past and future. The Vorthak were preparing to reveal themselves to all sentient species simultaneously, offering alliance to those willing to stand against the coming darkness and promising judgment for those who would oppose the greater good. The galactic broadcast began without fanfare, but its effects were immediate and profound. Across thousands of star systems on every inhabited world and space station, communication networks suddenly carried the same message simultaneously. The transmission bypassed all security protocols and language barriers, speaking directly to the consciousness of every sentient being in the galaxy. The message was simple, yet earth-shattering. The galaxy faced an existential threat from beyond known reality, and the time for unity had arrived. Species that had been enemies for millennia suddenly found themselves confronted with the necessity of cooperation against forces that could destroy them all. The Vorthak identified themselves as guardians of ancient knowledge, and humanity as the chosen leaders of the coming alliance. On the capital world of the Zephyrian Empire, Emperor Thexcaran received the transmission while in the middle of a military strategy session. The crystalline ruler's skin shifted through every color in the spectrum. As he processed the implications of what he was hearing, the empire that had dominated galactic politics for centuries was being informed that it was merely one small part of a much larger picture. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy as leaders of every major civilization grappled with the revelation. The warlike Kethamori paused their century-long conflict with the Veltaran Federation. The isolationist Christek Collective opened their borders for the first time in recorded history. Ancient grudges and territorial disputes suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of a threat that could erase entire realities. Back on Station Morthak, Marcus found himself at the center of a transformation that extended far beyond his individual experience. The consciousness link with the Vorthak had evolved into something deeper, allowing him to perceive events across the galaxy in real time. He could sense the reactions of billions of beings as they received the broadcast, feel their fear and confusion, but also their growing understanding of the situation's gravity. The three Vorthak in the pit had begun to change physically, their bodies growing larger and more complex as they tapped into energy sources that had been dormant for eons. Crystalline formations emerged from their scales, creating organic technology that interfaced seamlessly with the transformed station around them. They were becoming living components of a vast machine designed for purposes that transcended individual existence. Captain Thexavor and his officers found themselves witness to the birth of a new galactic order. The viewing area where they remained trapped had been transformed into an observation deck that provided them with displays showing events across known space. They watched as Vorthak installations activated on dead worlds, as ancient structures emerged from planetary cores, and as dormant technologies came online. After millions of years of waiting, the massive Vorthak entities surrounding the station began to demonstrate capabilities that redefined understanding of what was possible. One of them projected energy fields that created temporary rifts in space-time, allowing instantaneous communication with distant parts of the galaxy. Another began to manipulate matter at the quantum level, creating materials that existed in multiple, dimensional states simultaneously. Dr. Morketh's transformed research equipment now provided him with data, streams that his previous instrumentation couldn't have even detected. He was learning more about Vorthak capabilities in minutes than he had discovered in decades of study. The creatures were not just revealing their true nature. They were actively educating him, preparing him to serve as a liaison between their knowledge and conventional galactic science. Through his expanded consciousness, Marcus began to perceive the interdimensional threat more clearly. The entities from the parallel reality were not simply invaders seeking new territory. They were antithetical to existence itself. Their very presence caused reality to break down, converting organized matter and energy into chaotic nothingness. They were entropy given intelligence and purpose, and their ultimate goal was the complete dissolution of the ordered universe. The ancient civilization that had transcended physical existence had developed technologies capable of fighting this threat. But the war had cost them everything. Their sacrifice had created barriers between dimensions that had held for millions of years, but those barriers were now weakening. The interdimensional entities had learned from their previous defeats and were preparing strategies that could overwhelm even the ancients' most powerful defenses. Humanity's role in the coming conflict was becoming clearer to Marcus with each passing moment. Human creativity and adaptability, when combined with Vorthak energy manipulation and ancient knowledge, could create innovations that neither the transcended ancients nor their enemies had anticipated. The key was not just to use existing technologies but to develop entirely new approaches to reality manipulation. The first human response to the galactic broadcast came from Earth itself. where the United Earth government had been monitoring deep space communications for signs of their missing exploration vessels. The message they received explaining Marcus's situation and humanity's new role in galactic affairs prompted immediate emergency sessions of the Planetary Council. Within hours of the broadcast, human ships throughout known space reported contact with Vorthak entities. The creatures approached peacefully, offering demonstrations of their technologies and requesting permission to establish liaison relationships with human colonies and vessels. The pattern was consistent across all encounters. The Vorthak treated humans with a respect and deference that they showed to no other species. The transformation of Station Morthak accelerated as more Vorthak entities arrived from across the galaxy. Each new arrival brought unique capabilities and knowledge, adding to the growing complexity of the hybrid installation. The station was becoming a nexus point for the emerging alliance, a place where representatives from across the galaxy could come to witness the new order taking shape. The Zephyrian fleet that had been summoned to deal with the creature problem at Station Morthak arrived to find a situation completely beyond their understanding or capability to handle. Admiral Kexthor, commanding a force of 30 battlecruisers, discovered that his weapons were useless against entities that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. The Admiral's first instinct was to attack, but his tactical officers reported that their targeting systems couldn't lock onto the Vorthak entities. The creatures existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, making conventional weapons as ineffective as trying to shoot at shadows. When the Admiral ordered his ships to fire anyway, the energy beams simply passed through their targets without causing any apparent damage. The Vorthak response to the fleet's arrival was measured and deliberate. One of the massive entities approached the flagship and established a direct communication link, bypassing all security protocols with ease. The message was clear. The Zephyrian Empire could join the emerging alliance as equals, or continue to resist and face isolation from the galactic community. Inside the transformed dragon pit, Marcus felt the weight of his species' future settling upon his shoulders. The decisions made in the coming days would determine whether humanity would rise to become leaders of a new galactic civilization or remain forever trapped in the limitations of their current understanding. The Vorthak were offering partnership, but they were also making it clear that the offer would not remain open indefinitely. The consciousness link showed him potential futures branching out from this moment like a vast tree of possibilities. In some timelines, humanity embraced their role and led the galaxy to victory against the interdimensional threat, creating a golden age of cooperation and advancement. In others, fear and suspicion led to conflict and division, leaving the galaxy vulnerable to the coming invasion. The moment of decision arrived 3 days after the galactic broadcast, when representatives from every major civilization in known space gathered at the transformed Station Morthak. The facility had evolved into something that transcended its original purpose, becoming a living embassy where organic and technological elements merged seamlessly. Crystalline corridors pulsed with energy that facilitated communication between species that had never successfully exchanged ideas before. Marcus stood at the center of the main assembly chamber, no longer quite human but not yet fully transformed into something else. The consciousness link with the Vorthak had changed him fundamentally, granting him abilities that allowed him to serve as a translator between human understanding and ancient knowledge. His very presence seemed to calm the tensions between species that had been enemies for generations. The Zephyrian delegation, led by Emperor Thexikaran himself, arrived with obvious reluctance. The crystalline ruler's skin displayed patterns of deep purple and silver, indicating a complex mixture of rage, fear, and grudging respect. For the first time in the Empire's history, they were being forced to participate in negotiations, where they were not the dominant party. Admiral Kexthor had returned to the imperial capital with reports that fundamentally challenged everything the Zephyrians believed about their place in the galaxy. His entire fleet had been rendered helpless by entities that treated his most powerful weapons as minor inconveniences. The Admiral's recommendation was immediate: surrender and full cooperation with whatever the Vorthak demanded. The other galactic powers had reached similar conclusions through their own encounters with awakening Vorthak installations. The Keth-Mori war fleets had discovered that their enemies possessed technologies that made conventional military force obsolete. The Veltaran Federation's most advanced scientists had been offered glimpses of knowledge that rendered their greatest achievements primitive. By comparison, Dr. Morketh had been transformed by his exposure to Vorthak knowledge. Becoming something between a scientist and a prophet, he now served as the primary interpreter of ancient technologies for the assembled representatives, explaining concepts that had no equivalent in any known language. His research facility had become a school where the galaxy's greatest minds came to learn about realities they had never imagined. The assembly chamber itself was a marvel of hybrid engineering, with seating arrangements that accommodated the physical requirements of dozens of different species while maintaining an atmosphere of equality and mutual respect. Vorthak entities moved through the space like living pillars of light, their presence ensuring that no one could bring weapons or harbor thoughts of violence. Marcus began the historic session by sharing his personal experience, describing how a simple act of cruelty had led to the most significant moment in galactic history. He explained how the Vorthak had recognized humanity's potential, not through any demonstration of power or achievement, but through their genetic connection to the ancient civilization that had sacrificed everything to protect reality itself. The assembled representatives listened in stunned silence as Marcus described the interdimensional threat that approached their reality. The entities from the parallel dimension were not merely another hostile species seeking territory or resources. They were the antithesis of existence itself, seeking to convert the ordered universe into chaotic nothingness. Traditional concepts of negotiation or coexistence were meaningless when dealing with forces that sought the complete dissolution of reality. Emperor Thexkaran was the first to speak after Marcus's presentation, his voice carrying undertones of disbelief and wounded pride. The Zephyrian Empire had built its identity around the concept of superiority through strength, and the revelation that they were essentially children playing in a sandbox while greater forces shaped the galaxy was devastating to their worldview. The Emperor's questions focused on the practical aspects of the proposed alliance. What would be required of each species? How would resources be allocated? Who would have authority in military decisions? His concerns were understandable but reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Vorthak were offering. Marcus, guided by his consciousness link with the ancient entities, explained that the alliance would not operate according to traditional power structures. Each species would contribute according to their unique strengths and capabilities, with humanity serving as coordinators due to their genetic compatibility with Vorthak technologies. The goal was not conquest or domination but survival and the preservation of reality itself. The Keth-Mori representative, a massive warrior named Grextok, expressed skepticism about humanity's ability to lead such an alliance. His species had been engaged in constant warfare for centuries and had developed a culture that respected only proven strength in battle. The idea that humans who had barely escaped their home system could coordinate a galactic defense seemed absurd to him. The Vorthak leader in the chamber responded to Grextok's challenge by opening a direct consciousness link with the warrior. The connection lasted only moments, but when it ended, the massive Keth-Mori fell to his knees in submission. He had experienced a fragment of the ancient knowledge and understood the true scope of what humanity was being asked to undertake. One by one, the assembled representatives were offered similar experiences, each one tailored to their species' particular way of processing information. The cynical Christek collective delegates, who had initially dismissed the entire gathering as elaborate theater, found themselves weeping at the beauty of the ancient civilization's final sacrifice. The pragmatic Veltaran Federation council members calculated the mathematical impossibility of defending their territory without Vorthak assistance. The transformation of perspectives was rapid but genuine. Species that had spent millennia viewing each other as threats or competitors began to understand that their survival depended on unprecedented cooperation. The interdimensional entities would not distinguish between Zephyrian and human, between Keth-Mori and Veltaran. To them, all organized matter was equally deserving of dissolution. As the assembly session continued, practical plans began to emerge. Human colonies would be expanded and fortified using Vorthak technologies, creating staging areas for the combined fleets that would be necessary to defend against the coming invasion. Research installations would be established on every major world, staffed by teams that combined the best minds from all participating species. The most significant decision concerned the creation of hybrid technologies that would merge each species' unique capabilities. With Vorthak energy manipulation, human adaptability would be essential in developing new approaches to reality manipulation, but the specific knowledge and skills of other species would be equally important in creating a defense that could protect the entire galaxy. Captain Thexvor, who had been observing the proceedings from a designated area for lower-ranking officials, finally understood the magnitude of his error in throwing Marcus into the dragon pit. What he had intended as casual cruelty had instead triggered the awakening of forces that would reshape the galaxy. His act of petty dominance had accidentally created the catalyst for humanity's ascension to galactic leadership. The formal agreements were sealed not with documents or oaths, but with a consciousness-sharing ceremony that created permanent links between the participating species and the Vorthak network. Each representative experienced a moment of expanded awareness that allowed them to perceive the galaxy, as the ancient entities did, as a fragile island of order in an ocean of chaos that required constant vigilance to maintain. Marcus felt the weight of his new responsibilities settling upon him as the ceremony concluded. He was no longer just a human engineer who had survived an alien execution. He had become the primary liaison between humanity and forces that operated on cosmic scales. The decisions he made would affect not just his own species, but the future of existence itself. The transformed Station Morthak became the first embassy of the new alliance, a place where representatives from across the galaxy could come to coordinate their efforts against the approaching threat. The facility continued to evolve as more Vorthak entities arrived, each one bringing knowledge and capabilities that expanded the station's potential. As the assembled delegates prepared to return to their homeworlds with news of the alliance, they carried with them more than just information. Each one had been fundamentally changed by their exposure to Vorthak consciousness, becoming living bridges between their species and the greater galactic community. The age of isolation and petty conflicts was ending, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. The galaxy would never be the same. What had begun with a cruel joke in an alien dragon pit had become the foundation for a new era of cooperation and advancement. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars, not through conquest or domination, but through their unique ability to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and the adaptability needed to face an uncertain future. The real test would come when the interdimensional entities finally arrived, but for the first time in millions of years, reality itself had champions prepared to defend it.